In a world drowning in noise, a new god has been born, artificial intelligence. It decides what we watch, what we buy, and even who we love. It promises unimaginable progress, a world without sickness or traffic. But this promise feels distant. For most of the world, this revolution is something seen, not felt. Yet beneath this surface, the old world groans. Climates shift, and societies fracture under inequality. Instead of leveling the playing field, it has carved deeper divides. We stand at a precipice, a moment of uncertainty. Maybe the revolution will be coded, quietly and defiantly, in a place the world has forgotten to watch. Africa, a continent of beauty and relentless spirit. Its cities pulse with life, a vibrant symphony. From Lagos to Nairobi, a new generation is rising. But this energy exists alongside a heavy shadow, the long echo of a history written by others. The world sees Africa through a distorted lens. In the AI revolution, Africa is often cast as a passive bystander. The digital divide is a chasm in agency. Inequality creates worlds within worlds. The potential is immense, a sleeping giant. But hope is a stubborn seed. A silent revolution is brewing, driven by those who have been left out. They are not waiting, they are building. Buried within this narrative, a new story is being written. This is the story of the architect, a ghost in the machine. Born in the outskirts of a city the world had overlooked, this individual grew up without privilege. They looked at the mountains of electronic waste and saw a treasure trove of possibilities. This was not about escaping poverty, but rewriting the rules of power. Every line of code was an act of defiance. What if the very things that held Africa back were, in fact, its greatest strength? This was the seed of the revolution, a technological force that would rise from the ground up. The cities of Africa are monuments to resilience. They are a cacophony of sound and color, where ancient traditions dance with modern aspirations. Skyscrapers pierce the clouds, casting long shadows over vibrant markets. Here, a new generation walks with a global swagger, their dreams as big as the continent itself. Yet, beneath this forward-looking energy, lies a foundation cracked by the past. The lines on the map, drawn by hands that never knew the land, still dictate destinies. This is the paradox of modern Africa, a continent sprinting towards the future while carrying the immense weight of a history it did not write. Into this complex reality, the tidal wave of the Fourth Industrial Revolution arrives. Artificial intelligence, the new engine of global power, promises to reshape every aspect of human existence. But for Africa, the arrival of this new power feels eerily familiar. It presents a new frontier where the continent is once again at risk. The digital divide is the new colonial border. The global narrative of AI often excludes Africa, portraying it as a passive recipient of technology. The continent is seen as a market for apps and platforms designed far away. Africans are subjects in this digital kingdom, their data a tribute to unseen rulers, creating digital dependency. Algorithms trained on data from elsewhere don't understand African languages or economies. An AI navigating San Francisco might fail in a Kinshasa market. This stifles local innovation, diverting talent to foreign companies instead of solving local problems. Africa stands at a crossroads, deeper integration as a consumer, or building its own technological ecosystem. The question is, how can we build our own tools? In the architect's city, gleaming towers rise above sprawling neighborhoods where struggle and hope coexist. Digital billboards promise a future most can't access. Electricity and clean water are luxuries, not guarantees. E-waste piles up on the city's edge, broken phones, tangled wires, discarded computers. For scavengers and tinkerers, this is a goldmine, a place where trash becomes possibility. The architect grew up here learning to build from scraps to solve problems without manuals or new parts. This was an education in resourcefulness earned in the city's chaotic streets. In this crucible, the architect's curiosity and grit were forged. The architect's journey began in a dim library with a battered programming book and no computer. They copied code into a notebook, running programs in their mind, building logic from imagination. Their first machine was a Frankenstein creation. Scavenged parts, a cracked CRT, hope and tape holding it together. When it finally powered on, the blinking cursor was a universe of potential. With stolen Wi-Fi, the world's knowledge was suddenly within reach. The architect was no longer just a dreamer, they were a creator. The real work was about to begin. The architect's family never owned a smartphone. It was a symbol of a world just out of reach. Instead of envy, this sparked ambition. Not just to own, but to understand and build. The dream creates software that solved real problems for their community, not just mimic big tech. Critics called it fantasy, but every dismissal fueled the architect's resolve. The smartphone became a metaphor, a training ground for bigger challenges. The goal proved that innovation isn't reserved for the privileged. The architect dreamed of a future where no one was left behind. While others chased profit, the architect drafted a blueprint for real change. Their vision used AI to solve local problems, predicting rain for farmers, translating health info, empowering market women. The solutions had to work on basic phones, over SMS or WhatsApp, not just the latest devices. The technology would be open source, decentralized, and fundamentally African. The plan was a declaration of digital independence. The architect knew the struggle ahead, but the blueprint was set. This was about rewiring the future for freedom, not fame. The architect's workshop was chaos. Old motherboards, car batteries, and salvaged parts reborn as new machines. Scarcity bred creativity. Every fix was an invention, every failure a lesson. They learned electronics by touch and trial, not textbooks. In this world, you didn't buy new, you made do or made something new. The machine they built was more than a computer, it was a symbol of defiance. Creation didn't depend on privilege, just the will to build. In the hum of salvaged circuits, a revolution quietly began. With a working machine and growing skills, the architect reached out, applying for courses, jobs, scholarships. Rejections poured in, no degree, no credentials, no place at the table. Even local tech firms dismissed their homemade portfolio, branding them a dreamer. Each no became fuel, sharpening their resolve. If the world wouldn't open its doors, the architect would build their own. Their mission: create a table where everyone belonged. The struggle was no longer for acceptance, but for transformation. The first project, an AI model for street vendors using SMS. The architect built the prototype, envisioning a powerful tool for the informal economy. But the system collapsed in the real world. SMS commands failed, networks were slow, and vendors preferred notebooks. The project failed. The code was a ghost. Other failures followed, teaching humility. The failures revealed the gap between theory and practice. Technology wasn't the answer, understanding people was. You cannot write code for a world you don't understand. It was about mastering empathy. Defeated but not destroyed, the architect pivoted. They abandoned their grand projects and embarked on a new kind of education. Their university had no campus, their professors had no titles, and their classrooms were the bustling, chaotic streets of the city. They put away their keyboard and picked up a notebook. The goal was no longer to build, but to listen, to observe, to learn. They spent their days in the markets, not as a programmer, but as a student of life. They sat with the market women, learning the rhythms of their day, the intricacies of their supply chains, the language of their negotiations. They traveled to the rural outskirts, spending weeks with smallholder farmers. They walked the fields, feeling the soil between their fingers. They learned to read the sky, to understand the subtle signs of a changing season. They listened to the stories of harvests lost to drought, to pests, to a lack of information. They saw firsthand how a few days' warning could mean the difference between a season of profit and a year of debt. They were no longer just collecting data points. They were collecting stories, understanding struggles, and absorbing the deep ancestral knowledge held by the people of the land. This immersion was the most critical part of their education. It was a deep dive into the operating system of their society. They learned that trust is the most valuable currency. They learned that the most effective communication networks were not digital, but human, the web of family, friends, and community groups. They saw how information flowed through whispers, through shared cups of tea, through the trusted voice of a community elder. Any technology that ignored these existing powerful networks was doomed to fail. It had to integrate, not dominate. It had to empower, not replace. Slowly, a new vision began to form, one built on a foundation of humility and deep respect. The architect realized their role was not to provide answers from on high, but to build tools that would help people find their own answers. The technology should be a quiet assistant, a powerful but invisible partner in their daily lives. This unseen university taught them the one thing no programming textbook ever could: the human context. The code they would write next would be different. It would be infused with the wisdom of the market, the patience of the farmer, and the resilient spirit of the streets. The period of observation culminated in a quiet, personal moment. Sitting alone, surrounded by salvaged machines, the architect made a vow. It was a deep internal commitment. This work would never be about them, not for fame or wealth but a silent service. The ego was set aside. True power came from the impact of the work. To be a ghost in the machine was a strategic choice, allowing the work to speak for itself, focused on the community. This was a commitment to a different legacy, measured in lives changed, bringing an incredible sense of freedom. The architect could focus entirely on the problem, free to build on their own terms, guided by the needs of the people. The architect was now ready to build again, as a focused instrument of change. Armed with a deeper understanding of the people and a renewed selfless purpose, the architect began to see the world differently. They could see the invisible threads connecting the farmer's field, the market stall, and the family dinner table. They could see the patterns of information flow, the points of friction, and the opportunities for intervention. They were no longer just looking at the present, they were looking at the shape of the future. A future that most people, including the experts in their distant glass towers, had not yet imagined. A quiet, profound certainty settled in their mind. They saw the future before it arrived. The architect knew Africa's next great liberation would not be fought with guns or banners. The battleground had shifted. The new struggle was for control over information, for digital sovereignty, for the right to build one's own future. The revolution would be silent. It would be made of algorithms and grit. It would unfold not in dramatic protests that filled the streets, but in the quiet, incremental empowerment of millions. It would be a revolution of small efficiencies, of timely warnings, of fair prices, of accessible knowledge. A revolution that would rewire the continent from the inside out. This foresight gave the architect an almost unnerving sense of calm in the face of the immense task ahead. The failures of the past were no longer sources of shame. They were essential data points that had calibrated their vision. The rejections were no longer personal insults. They were confirmations that they were on the right path, a path no one else had yet charted. They understood that they were not just building a piece of software, they were planting the seed of a new ecosystem, one that would grow and evolve in ways they could not even predict. The struggle was far from over. In fact, the most difficult phase was just beginning. Turning this grand vision into functional, scalable code would require every ounce of their skill, resilience, and creativity. But the foundation was now solid. It was a foundation built not on borrowed ideas or foreign technologies, but on deep local understanding and a selfless vow. The architect turned back to their workshop, the blinking cursor on the cracked screen waiting like a patient friend. It was time to write the first line of code for a future that only they could see. The struggle was about to bear its first extraordinary fruit. The new project began not with complex code but with a simple, powerful idea. The architect had learned that the most effective communication network in Africa was not the internet, but the intricate human-powered web of WhatsApp. It was the digital campfire around which communities gathered, sharing news, jokes, and vital information. It was trusted, it was accessible, and it used very little data. This would be the delivery mechanism. The goal was to build an AI powerful enough to predict crop failure, but simple enough to speak through a chat app. It would be a prophet in your pocket, a whisper of guidance delivered through a familiar green icon. The work was painstaking. The architect began by building a model with limited satellite imagery and weather data, but they knew this was not enough. The real magic would come from integrating local, ground truth information. They built a simple interface allowing trusted farmers to report conditions via WhatsApp messages. The rains are 2 weeks late here. I see the first signs of fall armyworm on my maize. The river is lower than I've ever seen it. Each message was a precious, hyper-local data point, a piece of the puzzle that no satellite could ever provide. The AI, which the architect named Uvuno, a portmanteau of words for harvest and wisdom, was designed to learn from this conversation. It correlated the farmer's reports with satellite data, learning to spot the subtle signs of impending trouble. It was a symbiotic system. The AI provided predictions, and the farmer's feedback refined those predictions, making the system smarter with every interaction. It was a slow, iterative process, a digital reflection of agricultural knowledge passed down orally. The machine was learning the land's ancient language. The final piece was the interface. It had to be effortless. Uvuno didn't use complex commands. Farmers could ask questions in their natural language, even using local slang. They could send a photo of a diseased leaf, and the AI would analyze it and send back a diagnosis and recommendation. It was designed to feel like talking to a knowledgeable neighbor. The breakthrough was not just in the predictive power, but in its profound, radical accessibility. The architect had built a tool that didn't require the user to be tech-savvy, it required the tech to be human-savvy. The first true test of Uvuno came without warning. The AI picked up a subtle shift in wind patterns, analyzing weather data, and flagging a high probability of a massive locust swarm. This could be devastating, wiping out an entire season's harvest. A simple, urgent message was sent out to the farmers. Warning: high likelihood of locust swarm from the northeast in 3 to 4 days. Harvest early where possible, take protective measures. Naturally, there was some skepticism. But the trust that had been built held firm. They decided to heed the warning and rallied their neighbors. The community sprang into action, working day and night. 2 days later, the locusts arrived. They devoured everything left uncovered, but the protected crops and the early harvest were saved. They'd saved enough to prevent a famine. A harvest of hope, saved from the brink by a message in a chat window. The architect felt a profound sense of relief. The code had worked and made a difference. The story of the saved village, well, it didn't show up on CNN or the BBC, major newspapers didn't cover it, and government officials didn't celebrate it. Its journey was much more organic and honestly way more powerful. It started with a short, shaky video filmed on a cheap smartphone by the son of one of the farmers. The video was simple. It showed the devastating path of the locusts, then panned to the piles of saved harvest, with the farmer explaining in his local dialect how a message on his phone had given them the warning they needed to act. He didn't know how it worked. He just knew it did. He uploaded the video to TikTok. He didn't have a big following, but the platform's algorithm, this mysterious force in its own right, saw something in the raw authenticity of the story. It started pushing the video out, first to others in the region, then across the country, and soon across the continent. Young Africans, who were so used to seeing their continent through a lens of disaster, were captivated by this story of grassroots technological triumph. It was a narrative they hadn't really seen before. Africans using their own ingenuity to solve their own problems with tools they used every day. The video went viral. It was remixed, duetted, and shared hundreds of thousands of times. Folks added subtitles in English, French, Swahili, and Yoruba, translating the farmer's emotional testimony for a wider audience. The name Uvuno, whispered in the video, became a trending hashtag. It was a digital wildfire, spreading hope and empowerment at an astonishing speed. This wasn't a top-down press release. It was a bottom-up explosion of collective pride and excitement. The story resonated because it felt real, it felt possible, and it felt like it belonged to them. The architect watched all of this unfold from the shadows, an anonymous observer of their own creation's sudden fame. They were completely unprepared for this level of attention. The server, their patchwork machine built from scraps, started to strain under the weight of thousands of new requests from people trying to sign up for Uvuno. The whisper of their quiet project had become a roar, a viral storm of public interest. The breakthrough hadn't happened in a boardroom or at a tech conference, but on a platform known for dance challenges and memes. The revolution, it turned out, would be televised, but on a vertical screen. The viral storm on TikTok caught the attention of the mainstream. Tech bloggers, journalists, and NGOs began to investigate Uvuno. The story of a faceless developer creating a low-tech AI tool that saves a village from famine went viral. The world, which had previously ignored the architect, now came knocking. Journalists wanted interviews, NGOs offered partnerships, and Silicon Valley dangled IPOs. The architect ignored them all. Their vow of anonymity wasn't a gimmick, it was the core of their philosophy. The work was the story, not the person behind it. Giving an interview would betray the very principle upon which Uvuno was built. They saw Uvuno not as a tool for empowerment, but as a product to be acquired, optimized, and monetized. They wanted to buy the future that the architect had built. Faced with this flood of offers, the architect paused. The world that had once laughed at them was now, well, begging for a piece of their creation. It would have been easy to feel vindicated, to accept the most lucrative offer as a form of revenge. But the years of struggle, the sting of those early rejections, had taught them a profound lesson. Those closed doors had not been a curse, they had been a gift. Being denied entry into the established system had forced them to build something entirely new, something outside of that system's rules and limitations. The rejection was the very thing that had made Uvuno possible. Had they been accepted into a prestigious university, they would have learned to solve problems the way the university taught them. Had they gotten a job at a tech firm, they would have learned to build products that served that firm's bottom line. Their thinking would have been shaped, constrained, and molded to fit the existing paradigm. They would have built a better, faster version of something that already existed, instead of imagining something that had never existed at all. The exclusion had preserved the purity of their vision. It had kept them grounded in the reality of the problems they wanted to solve. Accepting one of these offers now would be a betrayal of that journey. It would mean taking their creation, born from scarcity and local knowledge, and handing it over to the very systems that would have stifled it at birth. The VCs would demand a path to profitability, likely through user fees or data sales, destroying the core principle of free access. The NGOs would wrap it in red tape, suffocating its ability to adapt and respond quickly. To accept their help would be to allow the revolution to be co-opted before it had truly even begun. With a clarity forged in the fire of those early struggles, the architect made their decision. They drafted a single, simple response, which they sent to every journalist, every NGO, every investor. It read, "Uvuno is not for sale. It is a gift. It belongs to the people who use it. The code will be made public and open source for anyone to use, adapt, and build upon. The architect will remain anonymous." It was a declaration of independence. It was a rejection of the world's terms. It was the ultimate act of defiance, choosing freedom over fame and empowerment over profit. The decision to turn down the world's offers was not just a strategic choice, it was a profound philosophical statement. The architect understood that fame in the modern world is a form of currency, but it is also a cage. It creates expectations, it invites scrutiny, and it inevitably shifts the focus from the work to the personality. By choosing to remain a ghost in the machine, the architect was protecting not only their own freedom, but the freedom of the project itself. Uvuno would not be tied to a single individual's reputation. It could grow, evolve, and even be handed off to others without being dependent on a celebrity founder. This act of rejection sent a new shockwave through the communities that were following the story. It was an even more powerful message than the creation of Uvuno itself. In a world that glorifies wealth and personal recognition above all else, here was someone who had achieved both, and had willingly turned them down. This was a different kind of hero, one who did not seek the spotlight. This act transformed the architect from a clever coder into a legend. Their anonymity made them more relatable, not less. They could be anyone. They could be anywhere. They could be you. The architect's statement was a challenge to the entire structure of the tech industry. It was a quiet manifesto that declared that not all innovation must be monetized, that not all value can be measured in dollars. It championed a different set of metrics: lives improved, communities strengthened, knowledge shared. He wasn't building for fame, he was building to free a continent from a new kind of dependency: digital slavery. This was a system where Africa was perpetually a consumer of technology designed elsewhere, a provider of data for algorithms it did not control. Uvuno was the first step in breaking those chains. The chaos of the viral moment began to subside, replaced by a quiet, determined sense of purpose. The breakthrough was complete. Following the release of Uvuno's code, the architect built something greater: the vision, a foundational AI model for others to build solutions, an open-source platform trained on the data of the African continent itself, a gift to the people, named Zawadi. The creation of Zawadi required digitizing vast amounts of African information, from radio broadcasts to academic papers. It was the digital soul of a continent. Zawadi was trained on pragmatism, understanding the nuances of African life. It began to develop a unique intelligence, finding patterns no human could. Zawadi was a new kind of lens, a way of seeing the continent in its full complexity, a public utility, a digital resource that belonged to everyone, the birth of a platform for a revolution. With Zawadi released, a simple link was quietly posted with a single message: a gift, build with it. At first, only a handful downloaded the model, intrigued by an AI that spoke their language. University students began to experiment, testing Zawadi's capabilities. One student built a chatbot for legal advice, while a group in Ghana created a tool to diagnose plant diseases. News of Zawadi spread through student networks and developer groups. Unlike proprietary models, Zawadi was open, demystifying AI and transforming it into a tangible tool. It was a digital spring fueled by purpose. They were co-creating the future of their continent, solving local problems. The rise of Zawadi was a cultural moment, building its own future. As Zawadi's use spread, it evolved from a tool for students into a powerful engine for everyday problem-solving across society. The seeds of innovation began to bear fruit in the most unexpected places, orchestrated not by a central authority, but by the needs and ingenuity of ordinary people. A collective of market women in Dakar, with the help of a local tech-savvy youth, adapted Zawadi to create a voice-operated system that tracked their inventory and calculated daily profits. They could speak into a cheap feature phone in Wolof, and the system would respond, giving them a level of financial control they never had before. In rural Kenya, health workers used a Zawadi-powered app to disseminate vital public health information. The AI could instantly translate complex medical advice into multiple local dialects, from Kikuyu to Luo, ensuring that life-saving messages about vaccination drives or disease prevention were understood by everyone, not just those who spoke English or Swahili. This broke down one of the most significant barriers to healthcare access, proving that the most advanced technology could be used to solve the most fundamental of human problems. The AI was not replacing health workers, it was amplifying their reach and impact. Even children became part of this rising symphony of solvers. In a community center in Accra, a teacher used a simplified version of Zawadi to create educational games that taught mathematics using local cultural references and stories. The children were more engaged than they had ever been with standard imported curricula. They saw themselves and their culture reflected in their education, making learning feel relevant and exciting. They were not just consuming content, they were interacting with an intelligence that understood their world, sparking their curiosity and building a new generation of native problem solvers. This was the true measure of Zawadi's success. It was not found in download statistics or academic citations, but in these small, powerful stories of empowerment. The platform was becoming what the architect had always dreamed it would be: a decentralized network of intelligence, a tool that allowed people to solve their own problems in their own way. From farmers optimizing water usage to mechanics diagnosing engine problems, a quiet revolution was taking place. Zawadi was the invisible thread connecting them all, a silent partner in a continent-wide movement of grassroots innovation. The organic explosive growth of the Zawadi ecosystem did not go unnoticed for long. The same Western tech giants and venture capitalists who had tried to acquire Uvuno now watched this new phenomenon with a mixture of awe and, honestly, a bit of anxiety. This was no longer a single, isolated application, it was a burgeoning platform, a potential rival to their own global ambitions. Their data scientists were stunned by the model's sophisticated understanding of African linguistic and cultural contexts, a feat they had been unable to achieve with their trillions of data points scraped from the global internet. The offers began to pour in once more, but this time they were different. They were more strategic, more aggressive. They were no longer just trying to buy a product, they were trying to neutralize a potential threat and co-opt a movement. Silicon Valley firms sent teams of executives to major African tech hubs, hosting lavish events and offering huge salaries to any developer with experience using Zawadi. Their goal was clear: to hire away the talent, to absorb the knowledge, and to bring the revolution under their own corporate umbrella, effectively killing the open, decentralized nature of the ecosystem. The tone of the media coverage also shifted. Tech journals that had once praised the Uvuno story now began to publish articles filled with concern. They questioned the ethics of an anonymous, unaccountable developer releasing such a powerful tool. They raised fears about data privacy and the potential for misuse, conveniently ignoring their own company's far more egregious track records on these same issues. It was a concerted campaign of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, designed to undermine the trust in Zawadi and paint it as a rogue, dangerous experiment in need of Western oversight and control. But the architect, ever the silent observer, had anticipated this. The decision to make Zawadi open source was its greatest defense. The platform didn't belong to one person, it belonged to everyone who used it. The code was public, the knowledge was shared. Even if the top developers were hired away, thousands more were learning and building every day. The West could not buy what was never for sale. They could not control what was, by its very design, uncontrollable. The architect sent out another single, anonymous message to the community: a gift cannot be taken, it can only be shared. The community understood. The offers were, once again, rejected. The refusal to sell out became a core part of the Zawadi ideology. The architect's actions created a powerful counter-narrative to Silicon Valley. The phrase became a mantra: You don't sell the future when your people are still borrowing the past. This captured the essence of the struggle. It was a declaration that this technological leap forward was not a commodity to be traded for personal gain, but a collective asset. The Zawadi community was pioneering a different model, based on collective ownership. They were building Zebra's profitable, sustainable businesses that repaired the social fabric. It was about building a better reality at home. The rise of Zawadi became a story of empowerment, building a future that was authentically their own. The architect's legacy is found in a silence. In a world screaming for attention, the greatest power was to disappear. The architect remains a ghost, a faceless presence whose identity is irrelevant. There is only the work. This anonymity shifted the focus from the lone genius to the power of the collective. It was about a spark that could ignite a fire in everyone. By refusing the spotlight, the architect ensured Zawadi became a movement, an idea belonging to anyone who chose to embrace it. The movement is decentralized, leaderless, resilient, growing organically. The Ghost's achievement was creating a space where millions could become architects themselves. It is not about who I am, it is about what we can all become. It must be judged by its impact alone. Is it useful? Does it empower? Zawadi, the tangible legacy of the architect, carries the whisper of a new possibility. More than software, it's a foundational text for Africa's digital future. Open source, it transformed a private creation into a public good. This code represents a technological birthright, forged from African data, designed to understand African contexts, and gifted freely to solve African problems. This is a legacy that breathes, learns, and grows. This open-source philosophy has sparked a renaissance of learning and innovation across the continent. The code is a teacher, a guide for aspiring developers, and a curriculum for a new generation. It is a living library, constantly being refined by the community it serves. It carries the DNA of the architect's philosophy, built for accessibility and inclusivity. It is a whisper that says, build, create, solve. The tools are yours. The future is yours to write. The story of the architect and Zawadi fundamentally redefines the concept of power. For centuries, power in Africa was defined by external forces. In the digital age, that power dynamic was threatening to repeat itself, with big tech as the new colonial master. The architect's legacy demonstrates that true power is not the ability to control others, but to empower them to control their own destinies. It is the power of distribution, not accumulation. The Zawadi movement illustrates a different path, where influence is earned through generosity and leadership is demonstrated through service. It shows that Africa's strength lies in forging its own path, leveraging its unique assets. You need a powerful idea, an empathetic approach, and the courage to defy conventional wisdom. This redefinition of power offers a hopeful blueprint for a more equitable global future. The story of Africa's AI revolution does not end here. The legacy of the architect is not a finished tale to be read and admired. It is an open book with countless blank pages. The conclusion is not an ending, but an invitation. The final and most important part of the legacy is the one that has yet to be written. It is the chapter that will be authored by the young people watching this story unfold. The ghost in the machine cleared a path and provided the tools, but the journey itself belongs to a new generation. The question is no longer if Africa can lead its own technological future, but how. This invitation is a direct and emotional call to action. It is a challenge to every young African who has ever been told their dreams were too big, their resources too small, or their ideas too ambitious. The architect's story serves as undeniable proof that the only barriers that truly matter are the ones we accept in our own minds. The legacy is a mirror, reflecting the potential that lies within each person. The narrator's final words in the documentary echo this sentiment. He is you, she is you, we all are. It is a call to see oneself in the story, to recognize the architect within. The unwritten chapter will be filled with thousands of new solutions, built on the Zawadi platform and beyond. It will be a story of AI-powered healthcare reaching the most remote villages, of education being personalized for every child, of new sustainable economies being born from grassroots innovation. It will be a story written in Python, Yoruba, Swahili, and countless other languages. It will be a story of successes and failures, of struggles and breakthroughs. It will be noisy, chaotic, and beautiful. It will be the story of a continent fully awakening to its own immense power. The ultimate legacy is this transfer of ownership. The story is no longer the architect's, it is yours. The invitation is on the table, the tools are in your hands. The continent is watching, not for a single savior, but for an army of creators, of problem solvers, of dreamers who are willing to get their hands dirty. The code beneath the dust has been unearthed. Now, it is time to build with it. It is time to rise. It is time to write the future. Africa is not just watching. Africa is waiting for you.